The fluorescent hum is the only thing louder than the silence. You're sitting in a windowless room, surrounded by high-ranking officers who have already decided you're a fraud. They see a clean uniform and a blank file. They see someone who hasn't earned their place. But they don't know about the 73 shadows following you. If you speak, you break the law. If you stay quiet, they break your career. What would you choose, your honor or your oath? The hum of the fluorescent tubes isn't just a sound. It's a vibration that settles deep in your marrow. It's the sound of a room designed to strip a person down to their base components. No windows, no recycled air. Just the flat, oppressive glow reflecting off the navy gray walls and a single metal table bolted to the floor. Staff Sergeant Wraith Vance sits at that table. Her hands are flat against the cold steel, palms down, fingers unmoving. If you were in those boots, could you keep your heart rate from hammering against your ribs? Most people would be twitching, adjusting their collar, or searching the room for an exit. Not Kaylin. Her breathing is a mechanical rhythm. In for 4, hold, out for 6. It's the kind of breath you learn when a single stray sound means a bullet in the dark. Watching from the corners are 3 cameras, their red eyes blinking in a slow, patient cadence. They aren't just recording a hearing, they are documenting a dissection. Across from her, the room is a wall of polished brass and starched fabric. Senior officers lean back with arms crossed, their expressions already set in stone. They didn't come here to listen. They came to watch a problem get erased. Think about the psychological weight of that silence. It's heavy, like the air before a massive storm. You can feel the assumption vibrating off the officers. They see a woman in her early 30s who looks like she belongs in a logistics office, someone who spends her days filing requisitions for printer ink. Her sleeves are crisp, her boots are mirrored, and her rank sits on her collar without a single ribbon of decoration. To them, she is a blank page. And in the military, a blank page is usually a sign of someone who's been hiding in the shadows of someone else's career. Lieutenant General Hollis Thorne leans forward. The chair beneath him groans, a sharp, metallic protest in the quiet. He doesn't look at Kaylin at first. He looks at the file in front of him. It's a thin folder, mostly empty, scattered with black bars of redaction that look like scars across the paper. He looks at the file, then at Kaylin, and lets out a short, dry chuckle, the kind of laugh that doesn't reach the eyes. "So," Thorne says, his voice carrying that effortless authority that comes with 3 stars. "Let's talk about your record, Staff Sergeant, or rather, the lack of one." He flips a page, the sound like a gunshot in the small room. A few officers behind him exchange a smirk. They see a puzzle they think they've already solved. In their minds, Kaylin is a product of favoritism, someone whose family had enough pull to keep her out of the dirt while still collecting the paychecks. They see the gaps in her timeline, months where she was attached to units that have no record of her, deployments to regions that were supposed to be peaceful. What would you do in this silence? Would you scream your achievements? Would you tell them about the nights you spent soaked in mud, holding your breath while a patrol passed 3 feet from your face? Kaylin does none of that. She stays exactly where she is, silent, steady, unmoved. Her jaw is set, but only enough to be noticed by someone looking for a crack in the armor. She can read this room the way a sailor reads the swell of a dark sea. She doesn't wait for the thunder. She feels the static in the air. She watches a Navy legal officer grip a pen like a scalpel, ready to cut her career out of the books. She watches the junior aides mimic the dismissive posture of their superiors, because in this room, judgment is more contagious than any fever. Years ago, an instructor told her that the hardest part of the service wasn't the miles or the hunger. It was standing still while your name was turned into a story you didn't recognize. Kaylin feels that truth now, like a cold hand on her shoulder. She is being ordered to live as a ghost, yet she is being tried for not having a shadow. The pressure behind her eyes is intense, but her hands remain flat. Not because she's calm, but because she refuses to give them the satisfaction of seeing her pulse jump in her fingertips. She is a Marine who has been trusted with things the public will never hear, and that leaders like Thorne will never admit exist. Her operational history is buried under clearance walls so thick that even General Thorne's rank would bounce off them like a rubber ball. But Thorne isn't used to being told no. He sees her silence not as discipline, but as defiance. He sees the redactions in her file not as national security, but as a personal insult to his authority. Thorne's smile vanishes. He picks up a heavy, black-bound folder, the special access file that even he was only granted an hour ago. He slides it slowly across the steel table. It doesn't reach her. It stops right in the center, a dark island between them. "Here's the problem, Vance," Thorne says, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a serrated blade. "I've seen classified, and then I've seen non-existent. Your file says you spent 6 months in the northern Arabian Sea on a vessel that hasn't left dry dock in 3 years. It says you received a commendation for a mission that, according to the Pentagon, never took place." He leans in closer, his shadow falling over her hands. "I don't care who you're protecting, or whose favor you're returning. This hearing is about accountability. And right now you look like a ghost who's been stealing a paycheck." He taps the black folder. "I'm going to ask you once, and if the answer isn't in this file, you're leaving this room in handcuffs." The red light on the camera blinks. "Wait. Record, Judge." Thorne fixes his gaze on her, his eyes narrowed with a predatory intensity. "Explain the discrepancy in your last deployment. Tell me exactly what your support role entailed, or I will personally see to it that your name is erased from the rolls by sunset." Kaylin looks at the black folder. She knows what's inside. She also knows that the moment she speaks, she violates a Title 50 non-disclosure agreement that carries a life sentence in a military prison. The silence stretches. 1 second, 2, 5. Would you break your oath to save your life? Or would you let the system crush you to keep a secret? Kaylin clears her throat. The first sound she's made. It's quiet, but it stops the room's breathing. "Sir," she says. Her voice is steady as a heartbeat. "I am not authorized to discuss the contents of that deployment." Thorne's face reddens, the veins in his neck bulging against his starched collar. He slams his hand onto the metal table, the ring on his finger echoing like a hammer. "Wrong answer, Staff Sergeant," he roars. He reaches into the folder and pulls out a single, unredacted sheet of paper, one that clearly wasn't supposed to be there. He slams it down in front of her. "This is a manifest from a Navy SEAL transport. Your name is on it, but there's no mission objective listed, only a coordinate in a country we aren't at war with." He leans so close she can smell the stale coffee on his breath. "Tell me why you were on that bird, Vance. Tell me the truth, or tell it to a cell." The air in the room has grown thick, saturated with the metallic tang of old sweat and the heat radiating from the electronic equipment recording Kaylin Vance's potential downfall. It's a sensory trap. General Thorne is leaning so far into Kaylin's personal space that his shadow swallows her hands, yet she doesn't flinch. Imagine the sheer mental iron required to sit there while a 3-star general screams in your face, knowing that a single slip of the tongue, one defensive remark, could trigger a chain reaction that burns down the most sensitive operations in the hemisphere. Thorne's finger stabs at the manifest he slammed onto the table. The paper crinkles under the force, a sharp, dry sound that echoes off the gray walls. "This coordinate," he hisses, his face a map of broken capillaries and righteous fury. "A scrubland in a denied area. No embassy, no official presence. Yet here is your name, listed as a passenger on a bird that wasn't supposed to be in that airspace. You weren't there for logistics, Vance. You weren't there to file paperwork." What would you do if the very system you bled for turned into your interrogator? The irony is a physical weight. Kaylin's pulse remains a steady, rhythmic thrum in her neck, visible only if you look closely at the pulse point. She isn't thinking about the general's threats. She's thinking about the no-name training she endured years ago in the frozen ridges of the East. She remembers the smell of wet earth and ozone, the feeling of ice crystals forming in her lungs as she was taught that her identity was a secondary resource, something to be used and then discarded for the mission. "I cannot verify that document, sir," Kaylin says. Her voice is a low, controlled vibration. It's not a dodge, it's a stone wall. "You can't verify it." Thorne's voice cracks with a harsh, mocking edge. He turns to the other officers, his arms spreading wide. "She can't verify her own presence on a special operations transport. Maybe she was sleepwalking? Or maybe, just maybe, she's being protected by someone who doesn't want the taxpayers knowing why a low-ranking Marine is hitching rides with Tier 1 operators." The legal officer to the side begins to write. The scratch of the pen on the notepad is rhythmic, like a shovel digging a grave. This is the paper trail of a phantom. "In the military, if it isn't on paper, it didn't happen, but if it's on paper and it's a lie, it's a crime." The room begins to feel like a trash compactor, the walls of protocol and suspicion closing in. The junior officers in the back are whispering now, their voices a hiss of political plant and fraud. They see Kaylin's lack of medals as proof of her cowardice. They think she's a ghost because she was too afraid to be a soldier. Think about the psychological toll of that specific brand of isolation. It's one thing to be hated by your enemy. It's another to be despised by your own side because you're following the very orders that keep them safe. Thorne reaches back into the folder and pulls out a series of evaluation reports. He reads them aloud, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Competent, reliable, calm under pressure." This isn't a combat evaluation, Vance. This is what you write about a clerk who doesn't jam the copier. There are gaps in your service, 6 months here, 4 months there, where your unit is listed as admin pool. But the travel vouchers show you were halfway around the world. Explain the travel, or I'll have the MPs in here before you can blink. Kaylin's grip on her own discipline is the only thing keeping the room from exploding. She remembers those admin pool months. She remembers the weight of a heavy pack, the taste of copper in her mouth from sheer exhaustion, and the silent nods of men whose names she was never allowed to know. She had been ordered to live as a blank page, to be the shadow that does the work so the brass can take the credit. Now, that very blankness is being used as a noose. "The vouchers were processed through the appropriate channels, General," she responds. Her breathing hasn't changed. "In for 4, out for 6. "Appropriate channels?" Thorne slams his fist again. A glass of water on the table rattles, the liquid sloshing over the rim and soaking into the manifest. "I am the channel. I am the authority in this sector, and I have no record of you, which means you were either AWOL or you were part of a pet project for some admiral looking to play spy." He leans back, a cruel light in his eyes. He signals to the legal officer, who stands up and produces a final, heavy document. It's an arrest warrant, signed but undated. "We've looked into your joint coordination roles," the legal officer says, his voice cold and clinical. "We've contacted the units you were supposedly attached to. To a man, they say they've never seen you. They have no record of a Staff Sergeant Vance on their roster. As far as the United States Marine Corps is concerned, for the last 3 years, you've been a ghost, and we don't pay ghosts." The room goes silent. The smoking gun isn't a bullet, it's a lack of ink. To the people in this room, Kaylin looks like a deserter who found a way to hide in the bureaucracy. Thorne leans in one last time, his voice a whisper that feels like a threat. "Last chance, Wraith. That's your call sign, isn't it? Because you think you're invisible? Well, the lights are on now. Give me a name, give me a mission. Give me anything that proves you weren't just running a scam on the government's dime." Kaylin looks at the arrest warrant. She looks at the faces of the officers who have already condemned her. She feels the boundary line in her mind. the tripwire of her oath. Say too little, and they bury her. Say too much, and she destroys the only thing she has left, her honor. Her jaw tightens, a micro-expression of pure, unadulterated strain. Then, she looks Thorne directly in the eye, breaking the level gaze she's held for hours. "Sir," she says, her voice cracking just enough to show the weight she's carrying. "If you want to know what I was doing, you need to ask the men who didn't come back from those coordinates, because I'm the only one left who can't tell you." Thorne freezes. The room holds its breath. He slowly reaches into the folder and pulls out a grainy thermal photograph, one that was never supposed to be unclassified. He slides it across the wet table. It shows a lone figure standing over a pile of equipment in a dark valley, surrounded by heat signatures that aren't moving. "We found this in the wreckage of a downed drone," Thorne says, his voice trembling with a new kind of energy. 73 heat signatures, Vance, all of them neutralized, one person standing. Was it you? The number is out. The room is no longer just hostile, it's terrified. But as Thorne prepares to call her a liar, a man who hasn't moved a muscle for 3 hours slowly begins to stand up. The grain of the thermal photograph on the table is so coarse it looks like static, but the heat signatures are unmistakable. 73 white-hot blooms of light against a charcoal-black valley, all of them cooling, fading into the gray of the earth. And in the center, a single upright pillar of heat. One person left standing. One person who, according to the official records of the United States military, does not exist. General Thorne's breathing has become a jagged, audible rasp. He isn't just angry anymore. He is sensing a shift in the tectonic plates of his own authority. He stares at the image, his pupils darting between the cooling ghosts on the paper and the woman sitting 3 feet away. 73, he whispers, the number sounding like a curse. You expect this board to believe that a staff sergeant from a logistics pool, a ghost with no medals and no citations, walked out of a kill zone that wiped out a reinforced platoon? Alone? Think about the sheer audacity of that moment. You are being called a liar, but the proof of your truth is so classified that admitting it is a crime, and denying it is a career-ending confession of fraud. What would you do? Would you break? Would you beg for them to check a higher database? Kaylin Vance doesn't move. Her spine is a steel rod, her shoulders square, but look at her hands. Her knuckles are white, pressed so hard against the metal table that the skin looks translucent. That is the only sign of the war raging inside her. The physical manifestation of a soldier trying to keep a secret that is actively trying to tear her life apart. I am not asking you to believe anything, sir, Kaylin says. Her voice is lower now, carrying a resonance that makes the water in the glass on the table tremble slightly. I am telling you that my record is accurate as filed. If there are discrepancies, they are not of my making. Discrepancies! Thorne screams, the sound echoing harshly off the soundproofed walls. 73 dead in a denied access valley isn't a discrepancy, Vance. It's a massacre. It's an international incident waiting to happen. And you're telling me you were just support? He slams his palm onto the thermal image, his wedding ring cracking against the table like a gavel. Who were they? Who gave the order? Because if you don't start naming names, I'm going to charge you with every single one of those deaths under the Unified Code of Military Justice. The air in the room turns freezing. This is the fog of war brought into a well-lit room. The officers behind Thorne are no longer smirking. They are leaning forward, their faces pale, realizing they aren't looking at a paper pusher anymore. They are looking at something they don't understand, a predator disguised as a clerk. They see the stillness in Kaylin's eyes, a flat, 1,000-yard stare that doesn't belong in a windowless room in Virginia. It's the look of someone who has seen the sun rise over a valley of shadows and stopped counting the cost. Imagine the psychological weight of those 73 shadows. Every night when she closes her eyes, She sees those heat signatures. She hears the rhythmic thud of the transport bird that never came to pick them up. She feels the metallic taste of adrenaline and the smell of sulfur and wet sand. And now, she has to sit in a climate-controlled room and be mocked for it by men who have never had to wash the dust of a foreign land out of their pores. "The names are not mine to give, General," Kalen says. Each word is a slow, deliberate strike. "The mission objective was achieved. The cost was paid. My signature is on the after-action report that should be in your hand. If it isn't, you need to ask yourself why your clearance wasn't high enough to see it." A collective gasp ripples through the aides in the back. You don't tell a 3-star general his clearance is too low. You don't challenge the hierarchy in a room built to enforce it. Thorne's face goes from red to a terrifying, bruised purple. He reaches for the phone on the table, his hand trembling with the intent to call the MPs to end this charade once and for all. "You're done, Vance," Thorne hisses, his finger hovering over the dial. "I'm stripping your rank. I'm stripping your pension. You'll spend the next 40 years in Leavenworth wondering if those 73 names were worth your life." But as his finger descends, a sound interrupts the tension. It's the sound of a heavy chair sliding back, not with a bang, but with a slow, controlled scrape. Everyone turns. In the very back of the room, sitting in the darkest corner, a man who has remained a silent observer for 3 hours is standing up. He is thin, his uniform slightly oversized, but the stars on his shoulders are gold, not silver. Rear Admiral Silas Vane. He hasn't taken a single note. He hasn't whispered to an aide. He has simply watched. Admiral Vane steps into the light. His boots don't click on the floor. They make a soft, muffled sound, like someone used to moving in places where sound is a liability. He walks past the junior officers, who scramble to get out of his way. He walks past the legal officer, who suddenly looks very small. He stops right behind General Thorne. Vane doesn't look at Thorne. He looks at Kalen. For the first time in the entire hearing, someone is looking at her with something other than contempt. It's a look of recognition. It's the look of one ghost seeing another. "General Thorne," Vane says, his voice like dry parchment rubbing together. "Put the phone down." Thorne spins around, his eyes wide. "Admiral, this woman is a—" "I know exactly what she is," Vane interrupts, his voice not rising, but somehow filling every inch of the room. He reaches into his inner jacket pocket and pulls out a small, silver coin. A challenge coin with no unit markings, just a single, raised obsidian wing. He places it on top of the thermal photograph. The room goes dead silent. You could hear a pin drop on the carpeted section of the floor. Thorne looks at the coin, then back at Vane, his jaw hanging slightly slack. "Everyone without black level clearance," Vane says, his eyes still fixed on Kalen. "Leave this room now. That includes the cameras, that includes the recorders, and that includes you, General, if you can't show me the proper credentials within 30 seconds. Thorne looks like he's been slapped. He looks at Kalen, then at the Admiral, his reality shattering. He realizes he hasn't been presiding over a hearing. He's been interfering with a secret so deep it doesn't even have a name. The room is clearing. The cameras are clicking off. But as the door begins to heavy swing shut, Vane leans over the table and says the one thing Kalen never thought she'd hear. The heavy steel door thuds shut with a sound like a guillotine blade hitting its mark. The hum of the room changes instantly as the recording equipment is killed, leaving only the low, pressurized hiss of the ventilation system. The crowded tribunal has been purged. General Thorne stands frozen, his hand still hovering over the dead telephone, his face a pale mask of confusion and bruised ego. He is a man who spent 40 years climbing a ladder, only to realize Rear Admiral Silas Vane is standing on a platform he didn't even know existed. Think about the shift in the air. One moment Kalen Vance was a criminal in the eyes of the law. The next, the law itself has been ordered to leave the room. What would you feel in that vacuum? Relief? or a deeper, more profound terror? Because when the rules of the standard military disappear, you aren't safe. You're just unmonitored. Admiral Vane leans over the metal table, his shadow stretching long and thin across the thermal photograph of the 73 ghosts. He doesn't look like a high-ranking officer anymore. He looks like a man who has lived a century in the last 3 years. The Joint Phantom Task Force was never a budget line, Thorne, Vane says, his voice a dry rasp that seems to suck the moisture out of the room. It was a necessity. While you were arguing over logistics in the green zone, we were operating in the gaps where sovereignty doesn't exist. He turns his gaze back to Kalen. Staff Sergeant, I personally signed the KIA notifications for everyone on that transport bird. I watched the encrypted feed go dark. We saw the thermobaric bloom. We assumed the recovery window was 0. He pauses, and for a second, the mask of the Admiral slips, revealing a raw, jagged grief. How are you sitting in front of me? Kalen's breathing hitched, just once, the first crack in the porcelain. The sensory memory hits her like a physical blow. The smell of scorched magnesium, the way the silence after an explosion feels like being deafened by wool. She remembers the weight of the rubble on her legs and the way the stars looked through the smoke of the burning wreckage. I crawled 3 miles to the extraction secondary, sir, Kalen says. The words are brittle. I waited 48 hours. No one came. I cached the sensitive gear and began the E&E. Imagine the psychological endurance of that journey. Escaping and evading through 70 miles of denied territory, with no radio, no support, and 73 brothers in arms left behind in the ash. Every step she took was a step further into a world that had already declared her dead. When she finally reached a friendly outpost, she didn't scream for help. She followed her black-level protocols. She wiped her tracks. She stayed a ghost. Thorne finds his voice, though it's thin and reedy. This is highly irregular, Admiral. If she survived, she should have reported to command. By staying hidden, by allowing her file to remain blank, she's compromised the entire chain of... The chain of command would have killed her, Harold. Vane interrupts, finally looking at Thorne with a cold, piercing clarity. The moment she checked into a standard unit, the paper trail would have alerted the very people who sabotaged that mission. She didn't stay hidden to save her life. She stayed hidden to protect the program. The realization hits the room like a physical weight. The internal stake for Kalen wasn't just her career. It was the realization that her own side had a leak so deep that the only way to be a loyal soldier was to become a deserter in the eyes of the public. What do you do when the only way to serve your country is to let your country hate you? Vane slides a new folder across the table. It isn't paper. It's a slim, black tablet that requires a biometric scan just to wake up. The 73 weren't just soldiers, Thorne. They were the only ones who knew about the deep-tier infiltration in the eastern ridges. Kalen isn't a clerk. She is the keeper of the only evidence that explains why that mission was compromised from the inside. He taps the screen, and a map appears, one with no borders, only shifting heat maps of active insurgencies. She's been working in the shadows for the last 18 months, not as a fraud, but as an off-the-books investigator for my office. She used the logistics cover to move through the system and identify the rot. Kalen looks at the map. The blue light reflects in her eyes, making them look like cold flint. The physical toll is visible now. The way her fingers twitch toward a phantom weapon. The way she scans the corners of the ceiling even in a secure room. She has sacrificed her name, her identity, and her sanity to hunt the people who murdered her team. Thorne sags into his chair. The power he thought he held has evaporated. He isn't the judge anymore. He's a witness to a war he isn't equipped to fight. Vane leans in closer to Kalen, his voice dropping to a whisper. We found the source of the leak, Vance. It wasn't in the field. It was in the very building where you're currently being tried for fraud. They used this hearing to flush you out. They wanted to see if the Wraith was real. Kaylin's eyes widen. The white knuckles on the table suddenly go limp as the adrenaline of a new realization floods her system. If this hearing was a trap, then the room isn't secure. A muffled, rhythmic thudding begins to vibrate through the floor. Not a heartbeat, not the ventilation. It's the sound of a heavy-lift helicopter approaching the roof of the installation, unannounced and uncleared. Vane grabs Kaylin's arm, his grip like a vice. "They aren't here to arrest you anymore, Staff Sergeant. They're here to make sure the 73rd signature finally goes cold." The vibration of the heavy-lift rotors overhead isn't just a sound, it's a physical assault on the structure of the room. Dust shakes loose from the ceiling vents, dancing in the harsh fluorescent light. General Thorne is frozen, his mouth slightly agape, looking at the ceiling like he expects the concrete to collapse. He's spent his life in the world of orders and paperwork, but the sound of an unscheduled bird on a blacked-out roof is a language he doesn't speak. Kaylin Vance speaks it perfectly. Think about the transition in this moment. 1 second, you are a defendant in a kangaroo court. The next, you are the only person in the room who knows how to survive the next 10 minutes. What would you do? Would you let the men who tried to destroy your life fend for themselves? Or does the oath you took, the one they said you never earned, mean more than their betrayal? Kaylin stands. There is no haste in her movement, only a terrifying, lethal efficiency. She doesn't look at the Admiral or the General. She looks at the exits. "Admiral, the ventilation shafts in this wing are interconnected," she says, her voice cutting through the thrum of the rotors. "If they're using gas, we have 90 seconds before this room becomes a tomb. Thorne, get away from the door." Thorne stumbles back, his legs nearly tangling in his own chair. He looks at Kaylin, and for the first time he doesn't see a fraud. He sees a survivor. He sees the 73rd ghost in the flesh, and it terrifies him more than the threat outside. The power dynamic hasn't just shifted, it has been obliterated. Admiral Vane doesn't hesitate. He reaches into a hidden panel beneath the table, a failsafe only a few knew existed, and pulls out a heavy, compact case. "The data on this tablet is the only thing that connects the leak to the procurement offices in the Pentagon," Vane says, his voice strained as the building groans under the weight of the aircraft above. "If they get this, the 73 men who died in that valley died for nothing. They'll be remembered as a mistake, not a sacrifice." The sensory world begins to narrow. The smell of jet fuel begins to seep through the vents, heavy, sweet, and suffocating. You can feel the pressure change in your ears as the roof access doors are breached somewhere above. This is the weight of invisible service. There are no medals waiting for this fight. No cameras will show the public how a disgraced staff sergeant saved the men who condemned her. "Move," Kaylin commands. She leads them toward a service corridor that isn't on the facility's public blueprints. Her movement is a low, predatory glide. She doesn't have a weapon, but the way she grips a heavy metal pen from the table tells you she knows exactly where the soft spots in a tactical vest are. As they move through the dimly lit sublevels, the sound of boots on concrete echoes from the floor above, rhythmic, disciplined, and fast. These aren't MPs, these are professionals. The silence between the echoes is the most dangerous part. It's the silence of hunters who don't need to shout. Think about the psychological toll of this irony. Kaylin is currently escorting the man who tried to put her in handcuffs, protecting him from the very consequences of the secrecy he mocked. Thorne's breathing is shallow and ragged. He's clutching his chest, his face slick with a cold gray sweat. He is a man watching his world vanish in real time. They reach the extraction point, a nondescript parking garage exit that smells of salt air and wet asphalt. A blacked-out SUV is idling in the shadows, its lights off, its engine a low, hungry growl. Vane hands the tablet to Kaylin. "Go," Vane says. "I'll stay here and manage the official fallout. Thorne is going with me. He's going to testify that this hearing was interrupted by an unidentified security breach. If you stay, you'll be tied to the investigation. If you leave, you stay a ghost. Kaelin looks at the tablet, then at the two men. In the distance, the sirens of the base response teams are finally beginning to wail. Minutes too late. The men who judged her now stand in a silent, unplanned salute. It isn't a formal gesture. It's a reflexive act of respect from people who finally understand the price of the silence she kept. "Staff Sergeant," Thorne says, his voice trembling. He doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't have to. The shame in his eyes says enough. Kaelin doesn't salute back. She simply nods, a sharp, professional acknowledgement. She disappears into the SUV, the door closing with a soft, final click. As the vehicle pulls away into the morning mist of the coast, she is already opening the tablet. She isn't going home. She isn't going to a debrief. She is going to the Pentagon, not to file paperwork, not to sit at a desk. She is going to lead the next generation of shadows because the war in the gaps never ends. The iron vault is left behind, the fluorescent lights still humming over an empty table. The record will say the hearing was adjourned due to technical difficulties. The public will never know about the 73. They will never know about the woman who stood alone in a valley of heat signatures. Some warriors are loud because they need to be seen. Others are silent because what they carry cannot be shared. The system often mistakes the second kind for the first kind's absence. It rewards volume. It celebrates what can be explained. But the truth lives elsewhere. Kaelin Wraith Vance is no longer a name on a file. She is the ghost in the machine, the invisible hand that keeps the world turning while the important people argue in well-lit rooms. The SUV stops in front of a massive, five-sided building. Kaelin steps out, her uniform crisp, her face a blank page once more. She looks at the sunrise, the light catching the sharp edges of her jaw. She walks toward the entrance, but as she reaches the door, she stops. She reaches into her pocket and pulls out the silver coin Vane gave her. She looks at the obsidian wing, then tosses it into a nearby storm drain. She doesn't need a token. She knows who she is. She enters the building, looks at a fresh map on a secure screen, and realizes the cycle is about to begin all over again. But as the screen flickers to life, a single notification appears in the corner. It's a coordinate, one she recognizes, and a message that was never supposed to be sent. Signature 74 detected. You aren't the only survivor.